The gun was already in her hands before she understood why. Ruth Callahan had heard the horse before she saw it. A slow, uneven rhythm coming up from the creek road, one hoof favoring the others. Wrong sound. Tired sound. She was at the window with flowers still on her wrists, and by the time she set the bowl down, her body had already crossed to the door and lifted the shotgun off its pegs. 11 months of living alone had taught her that instinct moved faster than reason, and it was usually right. The rider came out of the low sun looking like something the land had almost decided to keep. Hat brim dragging shadow over his eyes. One arm curled tight against his ribs. The black horse under him walked like it, too, had run out of opinions about where it was going. She let him come to her. Stood on the porch, finger resting near the guard, not on it. Not yet. He stopped at the gate. Didn't dismount right away. A small thing, but telling. A man in real danger climbs down fast, desperate for solid ground. This one sat there a moment, deciding whether speech was worth the effort. "Ma'am." His voice came out sanded thin. "I won't come past your gate uninvited." "Wise," Ruth said. "Considering." His eyes found the shotgun and didn't flinch from it, didn't go soft and pleading either. He looked at it the way a man looks at weather. A fact, not an insult. "Horse needs water," he said. "I need a barn floor, if you'll spare one. I can pay for both." "You're bleeding." "I noticed. Most men don't ride this far bleeding unless somebody meant for it." Something almost like humor moved across his mouth. "Then I suppose I disappointed somebody." Ruth had buried a husband behind that house. She'd chased a coyote off a calf with nothing but a broom and bad language. She'd learned that a soft voice could still belong to a wolf in a borrowed coat, and she wasn't in the business of trusting strangers just because dusk made them look tired and sad. But his horse's head dropped another inch, its front leg trembling under its own weight, and something in her chest turned over before her mind caught up to it. "Trough's by the barn," she said. "Water him first. Then come to the back steps. Not the front door." He didn't move right away. "You don't know my name." "No," she said. "But I know a dying horse when I see one, and I know you'll fall out of that saddle before midnight if somebody doesn't look at your side. Water the horse." He studied her the way a man studies an offer he isn't sure he's earned. Then he nodded once and swung down, careful, favoring his left, boots landing soft in the dust like a man who trained himself not to make noise even in pain. "Cole," he said. "Cole Mercer." She didn't give her name back. Not yet. She watched him lead the horse to the trough, and it was the smallest thing that unsettled her most. Not the two guns on his hips, not the blood soaking dark through his shirt. It was his hands. He pulled the saddle before he let himself drink. He ran his palm down the horse's neck slow, checking for heat, for swelling, murmuring something too low for her to catch. Gentleness sat strange on a man wearing that much iron. By the time he came to the back steps, she had cloth laid out, hot water, a needle, thread, and the little brown bottle of carbolic Thomas had bought years ago from a doctor in Dodge. She hadn't touched that bottle since the week he died. Life on the frontier had a mean habit of making painful things useful again. Cole stopped in the doorway and looked at her kitchen the way a starving man looks through a bakery window, like something he didn't believe he was allowed to want. "Sit," she said. He sat. When he peeled his shirt back, she drew one careful breath. A graze along the ribs, deep and ugly, but clean through. Painful. Dangerous if left dirty. Not a death wound if handled right. "You've had luck," she said. "That's not the word I'd have used. It is if you've seen worse." He didn't answer that. She cleaned the wound while his knuckles went white on the table edge, and he never cursed, never grabbed her wrist, never made one rough move against her hands. Outside, his horse shifted in the barn. A loose hinge tapped somewhere in the evening wind. The house felt quieter than it had that morning, and yet, for the first time in 11 months, not empty in the same way. "What kind of men were chasing you?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "The kind a man's ashamed to have known." "That tells me little." "It tells you enough for tonight." She paused with the needle in her hand. "This is my house. My land. If trouble's riding behind you, I've got a right to know before it reaches my gate." For the first time, He looked at her without that careful distance behind his eyes. "You do," he said quietly. "And if I'm still breathing come sunup, I'll tell you more than I want to." It wasn't a promise made easily. She could hear that much. She tied off the last bandage and stepped back. "You'll sleep in the barn, like you asked. Dry hay in the east stall. Breakfast's at first light, if you're still drawing air." He reached for his hat, then stopped, his hand resting on the brim, trembling just enough that she noticed. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan," she said. "Ruth Callahan." "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan." He left by the back door and took the cold air with him. She should have felt relief when it shut. Instead, the silence that came back into the kitchen sat heavier than before, like the house had remembered the sound of another voice and resented losing it again. She was folding the last cloth when she saw it. A small leather pouch on the chair where he'd sat slipped loose from an inside pocket. She picked it up, meaning only to set it by the door for morning. The cord had come undone. A folded paper slid halfway free before she caught it. A name, printed in dark ink. Not Cole Mercer. Silas Vane. Wanted for armed robbery, cattle theft, and the killing of Deputy Amos Reed. Ruth's breath went still in her chest. Along the bottom, in a different hand, hurried, urgent, someone had written a single line. Not guilty of Reed's death. Proof hidden in Abilene. She looked toward the dark window, toward the barn sitting black against the last silver thread of evening. The man sleeping in her hay was either a wanted killer wearing a borrowed name, or a hunted man carrying the one truth that could save him. And somewhere out past the dark prairie, the men who wanted that truth buried were still writing. She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair by the cold stove with the notice folded in her lap and the shotgun close enough to reach in the dark. Near midnight she rose, crossed to Thomas's old desk, and slid the paper into the drawer beside his letters, still tied in blue ribbon. She didn't need to read them to know every line. "I will build you a porch facing west, Ruth. We will watch the sun go down from there when we are old." The porch had been built. They had not grown old. Dawn came cold and silver with frost. No smoke rose from the barn. Cole hadn't lit a fire, which told her either he was careful or he was gone. She crossed the yard with the shotgun in the crook of her arm and found him sitting against a hay bale, hat over his face, one hand resting on his bandaged side. For one sharp second she thought he was dead. Then he spoke without moving. "If you came to see whether I stole your horse, I didn't. If you'd stolen my horse, I wouldn't be standing here talking." He lifted the hat, pale under the dust, pain carved deep around his mouth, but no fever yet. His gun belt lay beside him on the straw, unbuckled, out of easy reach. He'd left it there on purpose. "You dropped something in my kitchen," she said. His face went very still. "What did you see?" It wanted notice. He closed his eyes for one long breath. "I was Silas Vane," he said. "That was the name I used with Pike's outfit. Mercer Pike. You've heard the name. I've heard enough to know decent men keep clear of his shadow. I wasn't always decent." The words came out plain, no polish to them, not begging for her pity. Ruth stood in the cold with the smell of hay around her and asked the only question that mattered. "Did you kill Deputy Reed?" "No." "Did you rob cattle?" "I helped move cattle that weren't Pike's to move." "That's a careful answer. It's the honest one." He told her the rest in pieces, like a man handing over broken boards instead of a whole house. For years riding for Pike. A deputy named Reed who'd found a ledger, names, bribes, land stolen out from under honest men. Proof enough to bring Pike down in front of a judge who couldn't be bought. Reed had trusted Cole to help get it to Abilene. Pike's men had caught them at a line shack north of Salina. Cole had drawn the riders off. When he came back, Reed was dying. "He gave me the location with his last breath," Cole said. Then Pike's men found him and needed somebody to blame. A hired gun with a false name and no family to speak for him. Easy enough. And the proof? Still hidden. If Reed told the truth. Ruth studied him the way she'd learned to study weather before it broke. Pain stripped men down to whatever they actually were underneath. On this one, it showed old grief worn smooth like a brand, and not much else. She was still deciding what she believed when Cole tried to stand, and the color dropped clean out of his face. She caught his arm without thinking, and for one moment they stood close enough that she saw the small scar along his jaw, the shame he carried behind his eyes like a second gun. "You should send me away," he said. "Yes," she answered. But she didn't let go. Far down the valley road, a crow lifted off a fence post and cut across the pale sky, and behind it, faint at first, then unmistakable, came the sound of hooves. Not one rider. Several. Cole's face went still in a way that told her everything before he said it. They found the valley. The dust rose slow above the cottonwoods, thick enough to be 4 men, maybe more. Ruth stood in the barn doorway with the shotgun in her hands and understood, with a cold and settling certainty, that whatever she decided in the next few minutes, she would not be able to take it back. For riders came out of the cottonwoods, and Ruth read them the way Thomas had taught her to read weather, not by what they said, but by how they sat their horses. The lean one in front rode loose and easy, like a man who enjoyed his work. A heavier rider kept his hat pulled low. A young one couldn't stop shifting in his saddle. And behind them all, held back just far enough to watch instead of talk, rode an older man with gray in his beard, eyes already climbing toward the barn loft before he'd said a word. Cole was already moving. "Loft," he said. "Now. I'm not hiding under my own roof." "You're not hiding. You're watching. There's a difference, and right now it might be the only one that keeps us both alive." She hated that he was right. She hated it more when he handed her his gun belt to carry up herself, because his hands weren't steady enough for the ladder and a belt both. He climbed slow, jaw tight, and settled by the loft window with his revolver low against his leg. Ruth crossed to the house, set out 1 plate instead of 2, and opened her front door before the riders reached the gate. Let them see a woman waiting, not a woman surprised. The lean one tipped his hat. "Wade Barlow, ma'am. Looking for a man. Dark hair, gray eyes. Might be carrying a wound." "Most men carry something," Ruth said. Barlow smiled like that amused him. "This one's wanted. Killed a deputy. Robbed honest cattlemen blind." "Interesting," Ruth said. How honest cattlemen always seem to need 4 riders to collect one debt. The smile thinned at the edges. His gaze slid past her toward the barn, toward the black horse standing in the stall, toward the fresh hoofprints in the yard he was already cataloging. Ruth didn't let her face move. "He said he had business east. Abilene. Abilene's east of here," Barlow said slowly. "Funny thing to lie about. Funny thing to notice." The heavy rider's hand drifted toward his belt. Ruth brought the shotgun up in one motion, smooth enough to surprise herself. "Move that hand again," she said, "and you'll ride home lighter than you came." Nobody breathed for a moment. Then Barlow laughed, soft and mean. Sharp tongue for a woman alone. A woman alone learns what a dull one costs. He looked at her a moment longer, not believing her, not quite able to prove otherwise, then turned his horse. "We'll be back," he said. "Tell Silas Vane, when he turns up, that Pike wants what's his." "I don't carry messages for criminals." "No," Barlow said. "You just shelter them." And he rode off toward the cottonwoods, taking his dust with him. Only when it swallowed them whole did Ruth's arms start to shake. Cole came down from the loft without a sound, his face gray, his eyes fixed hard on the empty road. "You told them east," he said. "I told them a lie. If they believe it, they'll beat us to Abilene." The word "us" sat between them before Ruth had decided whether it belonged there. She looked at her porch, her fields, the grave under the bare oak tree, everything Thomas had built with his own hands, everything she'd sworn to keep whole no matter what the world tried to take next. "We leave before noon," she said, and surprised herself again. They rode east with 2 saddlebags, a bedroll, and Thomas's old trail map folded in Ruth's coat. Cole's black gelding moved better after rest, but not with full strength, and by the time they reached the creek, his face had gone the color of ash. He crouched at the bank, reading tracks with his fingers. 4 horses. Same riders. Split here. 3 kept east, 1 turned south. Why? to circle back and see if we ran. He straightened slow, favoring his side. Barlow's careful. He'll find our trail before dark. They left the main road and climbed a narrow cattle path instead. One Cole seemed to know without asking how. On the ridge above the valley, wind tore at Ruth's bonnet, and for one strange moment the danger fell away, and she simply looked at the country she'd lived beside for 9 years and never once seen from this high up. Makes a body feel small, Cole said beside her. Does that comfort you? Sometimes. Sometimes it just tells me I've made too much of my own ruin. That's a man who's had too much time alone, Ruth said. I have. So have I. They rode on until his strength gave out near a dry wash thick with sage. Ruth built a low fire behind a screen of stone, and in its small orange light Cole told her about Deputy Reed, a wife and 1 daughter in Abilene, a girl who tied a blue ribbon around her father's wrist before every ride so he'd remember to come home. He ordered me to run, Cole said quietly. I left him dying because he told me to. Leaving a man, even on his own order, still feels like leaving. Thomas died alone in a pasture, Ruth said. I spent months blaming myself for not finding him sooner, like grief could turn back a clock if I punished myself enough. Did it? No. Mine didn't either. A horse snorted on the ridge above them. Both went still. Cole kicked dirt over the flame before the glow could give them away, and in the sudden dark he breathed one word. Rider. He found our trail. They ran before the rider could close the distance, cutting north through broken ground until they reached a half-collapsed sod house sunk into a low hill. Cole nearly folded getting off his horse. Ruth cleaned his reopened wound by starlight, and in the quiet after, he pulled a small object wrapped in oilcloth from his coat and pressed it into her hand. A brass key, tarnished at the edges, a strip of blue ribbon tied through the ring. Reed's key, he said. He told me the proof was hidden where his girl kept her Sunday ribbon. I don't know exactly what that means, only that this opens it. A boot cracked a twig outside. A voice followed, soft and almost gentle. Silas Vane, I know you're in there. Cole's hand closed over Ruth's, folding her fingers around the key. Whatever happens, he whispered, you keep that. The man in the doorway was older, gray through the beard, and Ruth recognized him as the rider who'd watched the loft window that morning. Nate Rusk didn't rush in. Careful men never did. Pike figured you'd be halfway to Abilene, Rusk said. Foxes still need holes, though. I'm tired of hearing what Pike figures, Cole said. Rusk's eyes slid to Ruth in the shadows. Widow's still with you. Poor manners, dragging a woman into your hanging. She has nothing to do with this. Stopped being true when she lied to Barlow with a shotgun in her hands. Ruth rose from the dark with the shotgun already at her shoulder. Drop it. For 3 long breaths, 3 weapons held the room still. Then, outside, a second voice called through the night. Nate, you find him? And Ruth understood the trap a half-second before Cole did. Rusk had held them here while another man circled the back. Move, Cole said, and they went out through the crumbled rear wall together, into the cold and the gunfire and the dark, and didn't stop running until the shots behind them had faded to nothing but memory and hard breathing. Cole slid from the saddle an hour later and didn't get up. Ruth was on the ground before she'd decided to move, her hand pressed hard against the wound that had torn open again, his blood warm against her palm in the cold. Cole. Nothing. Cole. His lashes moved. Not enough. She would not lose another man to a silent field. She packed the wound, hauled him back into the saddle by strength she didn't know she still had, and led both horses toward a small orange glow trembling on the northeastern ridge, a lamp in a window, her only choice between hope and nothing at all. The cabin belonged to an old woman named Martha Bell, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, entirely unimpressed by blood or shotguns. Friend, is he? Martha asked, looking between them. He's under my care. Not the same answer. It's the one I have. Martha worked fast and clean, stitching what Ruth had already stitched once, muttering that frontier praise was the only kind worth taking while it was warm. When Cole woke to the sting of carbolic, His hand jerked for a gun that wasn't there, and Ruth caught his wrist. "You're safe." "You sure?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm here." That seemed to be enough. He let his head turn toward her hand instead of away from it, and Martha, watching from across the room, said nothing at all, which said everything. Near dawn, Martha told her about the freight wagon leaving at first light, slow enough not to be worth robbing, headed east toward Abilene. "There's a price, though," Martha said. "Not coin. Tell me whether the man on that cot is worth what you're risking." Ruth looked at Cole sleeping, stripped of every careful defense, and said honestly, "I don't know yet." Then, quieter, "But I know he's worth the truth." That was answer enough for Martha. They didn't get the wagon. Wade Barlow was standing in the yard when Ruth looked out the window, smiling up at the cabin like a man who'd already counted his winnings. Martha hid Cole beneath a trapdoor under the rag rug just in time. Barlow searched the cabin with his eyes, noted 3 coffee cups on the table, and Martha, without missing a breath, drank from the third one herself and called it a strange habit of old age. Barlow pressed Ruth about the key, about Silas Vane, about a road east and a road west, both crawling with Pike's men. His hand reached toward her skirt pocket where the key was hidden. Martha lifted a kettle of boiling coffee. "Touch her," she said, "and you'll wear this to church." A shout came from outside. Martha's cousin, riding in hard. "Marshals, less than a mile out. Found bodies at the old sod place." Barlow's face went white with fury. From beneath the floor, one hard knock gave Cole away. He'd heard enough to think Barlow was about to look under that rug. Martha swung the kettle before Barlow could draw, and he fled north with his men just as the first federal rider came into the yard. Marshal Elias Work was tired in the particular way of a man who always arrived after the harm was already done. He knew the name Cole Mercer from years back, a boy out of Tennessee who'd ridden with bad company under a worse name. When Ruth showed him the wanted notice, the handwritten line at the bottom stopped him cold. "Not guilty of Reed's death. Proof hidden in Abilene." "Amos Reed was my friend," Work said quietly. Cole stepped out onto the porch then, pale as old linen, and gave the marshal his own name back without flinching. He admitted what he'd done and what he hadn't. He told Work about the line shack, about drawing Pike's men off, about coming back too late to do anything but hold a dying man's last words. "Where's the rest of it hidden?" Work asked. "Where his girl keeps the Sunday ribbon," Cole said. Work's eyes closed for one long breath. "Lily keeps her ribbons in a cedar box on her mother's sewing chest." Amos used to say the safest vault in Kansas was any place his daughter called hers. Barlow was already riding for it. Ruth wanted to go with Cole. He wouldn't let her, not out of doubt, but because his legs could barely hold him, and because if the proof was found without him there to answer for it, none of the running would have mattered. "You already saved me once by not leaving," he told her. "Save me again by going." She took the brass key. She left him with Martha, his gun belt hung out of easy reach, his eyes on hers until the road bent and hid him from view. Abilene arrived in a blur of hooves and cold wind. They reached Reed's small white house just as a child's scream tore through the street. Inside, the front room had been shaken apart, a sewing basket spilled, ribbons scattered like a life torn open. Lily Reed, no older than 6, clutched a torn strip of red ribbon against her mother's chest. The cedar box was gone. Barlow had it. They found him at the freight platform, cedar box shoved inside his coat. A stable boy no older than 14 dragged against his side as a shield. "Toss the key," Barlow called, or explained to his mother why a dead deputy mattered more than her son. Ruth's hands went cold around the shotgun. She could not fire, not with the boy in front of him. So she didn't throw the key at Barlow. She threw it wide, hard, skidding under a flower cart, and in the half-second his eyes followed it. Marshal Work pulled the boy free and Ruth put a blast through the wagon well beside Barlow's boots, not through the man himself. His horse reared. A deputy tackled the second rider. Work brought Barlow down into the mud and closed iron around his wrists. "This isn't over," Barlow spat. "Men like you always say that," Work said, right when the ending finally arrives. The cedar box, when they opened it, held ribbons first, red, blue, yellow, a child's small colored world, and beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, a ledger of names, payments, and stolen land, Pike's mark on every page. Amos did it, Work said, his voice breaking with grief and relief both. And Cole Mercer didn't kill him. By evening, the truth had outrun every lie built to bury it. Pike's ledger reached a judge before sundown. Warrants went out on names that had hidden behind money for years. Wade Barlow sat in a cell, and the man caught beside him gave up 2 more before supper. Ruth carried the cedar box back to Lily Reed herself. Was Papa brave? The girl asked. Braver than most men ever get the chance to be, Work told her. Lily looked up at Ruth. Did the hurt man help him? Yes, Ruth said. He carried what your papa trusted him with. Lily pulled the red ribbon from the box and held it out. For him. Ruth rode back to Martha's cabin the next morning with that ribbon folded safe in her pocket. Cole was waiting in the barn doorway, wrapped in a blanket, pale but breathing, his black gelding nosing gently at his shoulder as if scolding him for the worry he'd caused. It was there, he said, reading her face before she spoke. It was there, she confirmed. He closed his eyes, and the breath that left him sounded like a man setting down something he'd carried across half his life. Weeks passed before he was strong enough to travel. Pike was taken near Smoky Hill Crossing, not by revenge, but by warrants and witnesses and a ledger a dead deputy had hidden inside his daughter's ribbon box. Cole testified before a judge in Abilene, admitted every hard thing he'd done, and asked for no soft words in return. His sentence came as restitution and supervised labor, not a rope or a cell, because the ledger proved he'd tried, at the end, to carry a dying man's truth instead of burying it. Ruth went home to the ranch alone before Christmas. That was the hardest kindness, letting him finish his own unfinished business instead of asking him to carry it beside her. She made 1 cup of coffee that first cold morning. Then, after a long pause, she set out a 2nd cup beside it. Not because she expected footsteps at the door, because hope deserved a place at the table, whether or not it ever sat down. Letters came through January, his handwriting careful, each line a man trying to say only what he meant. Hers were about cattle and fences and the bare oak tree behind the house. In March, Cole rode up to the gate in clean daylight, hat in his hands before he'd even reached it. I can sleep in the barn, he called, and there was a gentleness in it now that hadn't been there the first time. No, Ruth said, smiling through something wet in her eyes. You can come in for coffee. That evening, before the sun went down, she took him to the oak tree. Thomas's grave stood clean under new whitewash. Cole removed his hat and stood beside her without a word, and she loved him a little more for the silence. I thought loving again would mean leaving him behind, she said. Cole looked at the grave, then at her. Maybe love isn't a road that closes behind us, he said. Maybe it's a lamp we carry forward. Ruth took his hand. They stood there until the sky turned gold over the grass, until juniper grazed near the fence, until the house behind them glowed warm in the last of the light. A woman who'd once believed safety meant locking every door against the world, learning at last that sometimes life comes back as a wounded stranger at sundown, asking only for a barn.